right, good morning, Sacramento. Welcome to the show called All Things Legal on Money 105.5, the Wall Street Business Network. If you've never joined us before, I think you're in for a treat, and if not, it'll improve your Jeopardy game. This is where curious personal injury attorneys distill topical events into their legal essence. What does that mean? Guess what? We're curious. So I like to read. I was a history major at Berkeley, and ultimately, we practice personal injury, and we like to think of ourselves as extremely good at it. I've been doing this for 23 years now. In 1996 is when my law partner Christopher and I started Ashton & Price. So we're coming up in our 20th year. But we know personal injury is a kind of a narrow topic. So what we do is kind of expand the horizons and hopefully drill down on topical events that ultimately will allow you to understand the legal essence of the issues that are presented on a daily basis. I'm joined this morning by my colleague Edward Shady. As we like to say, this is one only time that you want a shady lawyer on your side. Edward Shady, good morning.
Good morning, Sacramento.
And this is an individual that is a Renaissance man who can put in concrete, do electrical work, go work on his son's Camaro, and ultimately garden. He can put on stucco. He can fix a boat. And he's tried dozens and dozens of cases, jury trials. And Ed, thanks for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Tim Hodson, joining us also this morning, a very accomplished attorney, also part of Ashton & Price. Tim, it's great to have you.
Good morning, good to be here, and I want to say good luck to Chris Price as well. He's got the arbitration this morning, so fight the good fight.
Chris doesn't need luck based upon his skill set,
That is
so
true.
Chris, we expect the result that we've become accustomed to. All right.
Pressure is on.
So if you've never listened to the show before, essentially what we do is break down topical events, and today is no different. We've got some topics. Let me break them down so you understand what you'll be listening to. First story is Google this. Google car was pulled over for going too slow. And we'll talk about the issues pertaining to the law as it pertains to a car that's not driven by anybody. And if the car is going too slow and you honk at it, who do you get mad at? We'll talk about David Hasselhoff, who was on Baywatch and Knight Rider. Recently, he's had a couple unfortunate YouTube events whereby he was
destroying
He's talking about the hamburger?
Yeah.
and his daughter figured it'd be good therapy for her to videotape him drunk, as you do when you're in Las Vegas, talking to a
It's a
cheeseburger.
casting call for the hamburger.
So who knew that David Hasselhoff would pull in the federal Constitution and the First Amendment? And the First Amendment says that Congress shall enact no law to abridge your freedom of speech. And he wants to change his name from David Hasselhoff to David Hoff because he says he's had too much hassle. So we'll talk about how you change your name, common law name change, judicial name change, the First Amendment, etc. And we'll go ahead and talk about, it was pretty interesting. There was an article last week, it was in the New York Times, it was about sexting.
Oh, yeah.
And so if a 16-year-old girl sends a picture to a 16-year-old boy and she's without clothing on, ultimately, as it stands in California under Penal Code 311.3, that is knowingly sending and then receiving child pornography. I mean, you could be charged potentially with a felony. So the law really hasn't caught up with the technology because you don't want to have a kid who's 16. He didn't even ask for the picture. I'm sure he's probably appreciative. But
It depends.
But technically speaking, that's child pornography. So we'll talk about that and how the law needs to be fleshed out versus adults, bullying, whether or not you put that on a public forum, whether or not you keep it private. And because we don't want to have kids when they're graduating from college saying, have you ever been prosecuted for a felony? Yeah, my girlfriend when I was 16 sent me an unsolicited picture, and then if you get convicted of a misdemeanor, you're a sex
Registered
offender.
sex offender for the rest of your life in California.
So we need to talk about that because California doesn't have any specific law right now to deal with that, and that needs to change. All right, there's a very interesting case in San Francisco. It's a Dr. Mimi Lee who ultimately married her husband, and they, because she had breast cancer, they cryogenically preserved some embryos, 5 of them. And when they entered into the agreement, they signed a contract how they're going to dispose of those embryos. She wanted them, so she said she had a right to procreate. And the husband said, look, we're divorced. I don't want to be connected to you for the rest of my life. And the judge had to determine which side had the more compelling argument. We'll talk about that. We'll go ahead and talk about equal protection, bro. Skateboarders are saying that... snowboarders are indicating that the Alta Ski Resort in Utah, which is on federal land, has banned snowboarders, and they're saying, look, under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, you're discriminating against us, bro. And ultimately, they say that the Constitution protects them. We'll talk about how the Constitution probably doesn't. We'll go ahead and talk about this individual playing for the University of Kentucky, went for a slam dunk, caught his tooth in the net and lost his tooth, and we'll talk about whether or not there's any legal liability. and primary assumption of the risk. And if we have some time, we'll talk about what's going on in Sacramento. If you remember with the Kings, we had contract law, franchisor franchisee law. They couldn't move the team to Seattle. Chris Hansen, who was the investment banker from Seattle, not the guy to catch a predator. You know who I am? Chris Hansen. Not him.
You don't want to see him going to your house.
Exactly. So basically, the NBA said, David Stern said, look, you have a contract. You can't change the team without the NBA agreeing. It'd be like serving hamburgers at Taco Bell. You can't do that unilaterally because you're a franchisee. So they couldn't move it. The California Environmental Quality Act got involved. We had election law. All these things had to go in the right direction. We even had the Fifth Amendment and the taking clause in regards to eminent domain. All of those things applied. They went in the right direction. And now guess what? Sacramento may be getting a rugby team, professional rugby team. It's been announced that they're one of 6 cities. And rugby's been around since 1882 at Cal. And Cal is one of the leaders, and Jesuit is one of the very best rugby teams in the country.
Yeah, they won the national title a couple times when my son was there. Son didn't play rugby, but a good friend of mine, Jeff's son, did, and he was recruited and is at Cal now.
Yeah, Cal's won, I
So
think,
no Robert Taylor.
19 out of the last 21 national championships
Yeah.
have gone to Cal. in
Are you
rugby.
serious? I
Yeah,
didn't know that.
no,
That's
they're,
crazy.
they're very, very good at it. So the moral of the story, the reason that happens, in my estimation, is that you had to have all the right things happen with the arena. Now we have all this investment going in downtown Sacramento. And if you're not from Sacramento watching this, because today we're going on YouTube for the first time live streaming, so now you can actually put a face to a voice.
That might be a bad thing.
And you'll know the melodious tones is coming from Tim. The intellectualism that's brought to bear is coming from Ed.
Appreciate that.
And the energy that's being brought to bear is coming from me. So, and if you want to know more about us, go to ashtonandprice.com. You'll see our bios, our resumes, etc., and all the things that we've accomplished in our life. And you'll recognize you're listening to very special people. All right, so then also the downtown arena, based upon the 10th Amendment, which allows for police power, they're putting in all kinds of implements from a technological perspective to help traffic flow. They're going to make sure that the lights can be changed to green on 3rd and J during the beginning of games and afterwards, which I think is a very good idea. They're expanding the pedestrian walkways. They have a new program. If you can't find your car, because they've noticed that a lot of people leaving Sleep Chain Arena can't find their vehicles, so they'll take a picture of your license plate, and if you know your license plate, then they'll help you find your car, which I would say, if you can't find your car,
You
you're
shouldn't
probably
drive it.
drunk, and if you're drunk, call Uber. Because, first of all, it's going to be a red flag. We've got 5 individuals on J Street who've been looking for their car for 2 hours. Keep a watch on them because they're probably DUI.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, it comes to 911 dispatch. Send an officer to go help them.
Yeah, no, that's
And then you go in front of the jury. Sir, isn't it true before you got behind the wheel, it took you an hour and a half to find your vehicle?
I mean, we'll talk about it more when we get to the story, but that's just, it's typical that they're focusing on that aspect of it, and that's what they're selling. When if you can't find your car after a game, you should be getting into it anyways, and they haven't addressed 80 at all.
Well, which I think-
They don't even discuss 80 in this article. That's going to be the problem, is going to be I-80 getting on and getting off to get to that stadium. They don't even discuss it. The traffic commissioner doesn't even talk about it. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree, but the cool thing is that we talked about it before. We've got Vivek Ranadive, we've got people from Qualcomm, we've got people from Facebook, we've got people that are very switched on. And the Maloofs are cool, right? But their background was beer and gambling, which we all pretty much endorse at some time in our lives.
2 good vices.
But these individuals that own the Kings now are more of a intellectual group that has basically hitched their wagon to technological advances, and so they're talking about you can go ahead and reserve a parking space in advance. They're going to be texting cars to tell you where parking spaces are available. There's going to be all kinds of technology that's going to help the infrastructure and the flow. And the way that happens is the 10th Amendment says that any rights that are not contained in the federal Constitution goes to the states, and that's police power. And police power has to do with the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens. And when you're talking about traffic, that's what the health, welfare, and safety of the citizens is all about. All right, so when we come back, we'll go ahead and talk about Google cars. And hey, bro, why are you going 24 into 35? Uh-oh, there's no driver. We'll do that when we come back. You're joined by Ed Shady and Tim Hudson. This is All Things Legal, and I'm Craig Ashton. All right, we're back. I can tell you the show's getting bigger and bigger because the music's getting better. and
We're
better.
expanding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Not just the Sultans of Swing anymore.
Yeah. I kind of just want to sit here for the next 3 or 4 hours and just chill to the music.
I can do that.
Yeah?
Sounds good.
Well, yeah, Chris is in arbitration, so he won't miss us.
Nope, not at all.
All right.
The girls might miss us, but
All right, so basically, if you've never listened to us before, you're just joining us, this is All Things Legal. We are curious personal injury attorneys distilling topical events into their legal essence. And what does that mean? Yeah, we're curious. We're personal injury attorneys. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Chris and I, and with my colleagues here over the last 20 years or so, have resolved, probably 6,000 or 7,000 personal injury cases to the satisfaction of our clients. And we appreciate their trust. But we realize that the law of negligence, primarily within the confines of an auto accident or products liability in the confines of strict liability, is a narrow topic, and we are now drilling down on some events and stories that have occurred recently that will help you kind of understand from a legal perspective how these issues become germane to your daily life. So let's go ahead and talk about Google cars. So we've been talking before, was it 2001 Space Odyssey? Hal, right, took over.
Yeah.
Correct.
Hal, and so, I like technology, but I also know that my computer breaks down often. I also know that my Wi-Fi goes out, and usually when you call the IT guy, he waits till you're not looking, he turns out the computer, turns it back on, and he fixes it, right?
No offense to Brian.
Yeah, no offense, but
New Brian.
for those of us who don't know how these things work from the intricacies of the process, turning it off and on actually seems pretty helpful. Same with the Wi-Fi at my house, right? It's I go upstairs and it doesn't work. I just hit this little button and magically it goes back on. So now we've got Google cars, which are being used in Mountain View and Austin, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Texas apparently doesn't have any regulation whatsoever.
Really?
And California does. So the moral of the story is that this Google car is driving around Mountain View, and they said that the car is limited to 25 miles an hour, has a governor on it. And Google says they want to be friendly and approachable. Well, they were going 24 and at 35, and they got pulled over by a police officer who was happy to see there was somebody behind the wheel, but they weren't actually driving the car. So we talked about this before. If you're not driving the car, who's responsible? The law is going to go that way. And you were saying, hey, if you've been drinking and you're not driving, are you responsible for DUI if you're actually not controlling the vehicle?
And,
No.
Yeah, and then you get pulled over like this. Who signs the ticket?
Right.
Yeah.
You gotta have sound mind to sign the
Yeah,
ticket.
right.
How's
Hey.
it enforceable?
Technically speaking, officer, I wasn't driving.
I wasn't driving.
And I kept telling Google to go faster, but it wouldn't listen to me.
I'll sign on behalf of Google.
Because technically, the officer could write a ticket to that vehicle. I mean, Vehicle Code Section 22350 isn't necessarily for a maximum speed or over, it's below as well. If you're not driving what's considered safe for the conditions of traffic, you can get a ticket. So even if you're going too slow, you can still get a ticket. So you're right, who gets the ticket? in this
22,350,
instance?
drive for the conditions.
Yeah.
If it's fog and you're in a 50, it's not safe.
And Google wants them to be approachable and friendly. I can tell you that my law partner, who's
Yeah.
a little bit short-tempered when it when he perceives another driver to be lacking the requisite ability to maintain a cordial environment on the road.
Wait.
And he uses a horn much like he was born in Brooklyn.
Yes, he does.
And he's from Orange County. Perhaps it's there. He's part Irish, so maybe it's that part of his heritage that gets him a little bit agitated. But if you're going for friendly and approachable, don't be going 11 miles under the speed limit in a 35,
No.
because that ultimately is going to be not approachable or friendly. It's going to be irritating and vexing for sure.
It's going to anger a lot of people. And I was thinking of Chris as I was reading the story. Well, I started laughing to myself, thinking what he would do if he was encountered with this car going too slow.
Yeah, and you think he's aggressive behind the wheel. You should see the way he practices law. It's very aggressive.
Would you imagine you start getting behind Google vehicles like this, so you start yelping on it?
Yeah, and the Google, it's the car. So what does the car have, like this appendage that sticks out to give you I'm the number one because it's nobody else is driving. So how do they respond to it?
I mean, saluting with the bird.
Exactly.
They'll figure out a way, I'm sure.
Yeah.
There'll be a little light that comes on in the back window or something.
So it reminds me of an anecdotal story I heard recently about 3 individuals that were taking advantage of the legalization of marijuana in Colorado. And they were pulled over on the interstate, and the officer said to the individual in the backseat, sir, son, how fast do you think you were going? 60, 65, officer. Asked the front passenger, how fast do you think you were going there, son? 60 max. To the driver, 55, 60. Boy, you were doing 9.
That's a little slow for conditions.
Yeah, so the point is, I don't know if Google's taken advantage of recreational marijuana or it just has some sort of computer glitch, but I think ultimately this is kind of illustrating going forward some of the things that may cause problems with the automated driving, because it really depends on how the computer is programmed. and going 11 miles under the speed limit. Now it's just a prototype, understood.
Yeah.
But if you start having malfunctions in this, I mean, it's going to be a massive malfunction.
Yes.
And think about the Anonymous and all these people that can hack into computers. They're doing it right now on I think some Ford products where they can actually turn the ignition off
Yeah.
or turn on the windshield wipers. And so, if you've got a million cars on the road and somebody pulls a switch, it can cause a pretty significant problem.
Well,
Yeah,
we-
because these things work on GPS. If you have a
Right.
satellite go down or something like that for your GPS, all of a sudden the vehicle doesn't know where it's at. I imagine they're going to, going into the future, when you lay a road down, you'll probably down the middle of every lane start putting in magnets so that.
Yeah, that's called vehicle to infrastructure versus
Yeah.
vehicle to vehicle.
Yeah,
so
so
that's
the-
what they will be doing, so they can detect all those.
You can detect that, so no matter what happens, you always have that in place.
And then the car decides it wants to go on vacation without your approval, and
Oh,
next
that
thing
was
you
funny.
end up in Tijuana.
No, remember what the heck? What was that? What's the show? The guy ends up in the car drives him.
Oh,
puts
Silicon
him-
Valley, yeah.
Silicon Valley puts him inside a shipping container.
That's
Yeah.
right. No, but we talked about this a couple weeks ago when we covered that Anonymous story. I mean, Anonymous is kind of halfway doing it on purpose because they're like, look, the technology has not caught up yet. You guys need to completely get a new backup system for this because look how easy it is for us to control this car. You can't put these on a mass level because it's going to cause chaos if someone like us can just get in, tap in, turn it off that easily.
I hope it works because it will change the dynamic of traffic dramatically, because you notice that people slow down when there's a hill or there's a turn because the line of sight is not obvious, and then all of a sudden it clears up, and it's really weird. You'd be stopped and then you go 2 miles forward and there's no traffic. So I think that will help it quite a bit. But yeah, the technology's got to be brought to bear. But that Air Malaysia flight,
Right.
couldn't find it for 6 months?
Right.
With all this technology that we have. So anyway, those are issues that pertain to liability, who's driving, DUI, auto accidents, etc. And we've got to catch up, legally speaking, as to how these things apply. But Google pointed out that they've driven 1.2 million miles without getting a ticket because they just got pulled over and the car got a warning. Said, Mr. Car, Mr. Audi, please drive a little bit faster, you're impeding traffic.
Speed it up.
This is a warning. And so they've never gotten a ticket. They said 1.2 million miles is equivalent to 90 years of driving, so they haven't gotten a ticket. So far, so good. Good for them. All right, let's go ahead and talk about David Hasselhoff. If you are not familiar with him, he was on Baywatch, Knight Rider. I've actually never seen that show. Tim, that's about your wheelhouse.
You've never seen Knight Rider?
No.
Kit, man, best car ever.
Yeah? So the point is that he is a relatively famous individual, and he's, as a matter of fact, he's huge in Germany. I think he's
Yeah.
got an album there. I mean, he's
Couple
like
albums, yeah.
a massive star, kind of like Jerry Lewis. I mean, it's weird what the French like, right? So the moral of the story is that he wants to change his name, and he said he has, from David Hasselhoff to David Hoff. And he says that he's had too much hassle in his life, and therefore he's dropping it. Now, whether or not this is a meaningful name change or merely tongue-in-cheek, who knows? But guess what? The First Amendment protects your right to change your name because it is an expression, and Congress cannot pass any law that abridges your right to free speech. So, Ed, if you wanted to change your name from Shady to Sade, you could.
But I wouldn't want to. Why would anybody want to change my name?
I don't know.
I mean, granted, it took me a while to convince my wife to change her name when we got married and drop the hyphen.
and you could call yourself Phil Eagle because you love the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't go there either.
Yeah, but you could if you wanted, and Congress couldn't stop you.
But you can't call yourself Nike or Reebok or anything like that.
Yeah, so the limitations really are that if you're taking over a name of a famous person, then there may be some infringement on their trademark and on the value of their name. Ultimately, you can't use a name that creates fighting words like ISIS rocks. I mean, that you're going to get yourself beaten up constantly, probably for very good reason.
Or that moron back in, I think it was Massachusetts, named his kid Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
I mean,
So yeah, basically, whenever there's fighting words, the law doesn't protect you. Defamation is not protected. Yelling fire in a crowded movie theater is not protected. Inciting words, in other words, I say something to get you to do something, that's not protected. Fighting words, I say something to you which causes a visceral response which only a reasonable person would respond in a violent way. So those things are not protected. You can change your name based upon common law, which means you can just change your name and you start using it, but it doesn't have any legal effect in regards to your Social Security, in regards to your passport, in regards to the DMV. For instance, Caitlyn Jenner recently changed her name, and she was going about it common law, and then she did it legally. So in California, you basically can change your name under Family Code 2082. So if you take the name of the person that you're marrying, then it's super, super easy. You just go in, they give you a name change, and then you basically let the DMV know, Social Security, you let the passport people know.
Yeah, you just supply your marriage certificate with that, and they'll take the appropriate actions.
And then Civil Code 1279.5 talks about getting judicial approval. So as long as you're not on parole, as long as you are not on probation, and as long as you're not a registered sex offender, because bottom line, the idea behind registering as a sex offender is they want to know where you are, and if you keep changing your name, they can't follow you.
You're not allowed to disappear.
So those are the only absolute prohibitions in California to changing your name. You petition the court takes a look at the name to see whether or not it's a fighting word, whether or not you're on probation, parole, etc. And I think that's fair. I mean, what do you guys think?
No, absolutely, and you know, harkening back to the common law. I mean, police refer to, you have gang members out there with their gang names. Also, they call them monikers, and that's their common law name out there on the street. And going back in our own history, you'd look at Billy the Kid. That's what everybody identifies him as, but his given name was William Bonney.
William H. Bonney.
Yeah, so you can see how that becomes so used over time that becomes your name. And certain people that have, Sammy the Bull Gravano.
Well, Tiger Woods. His name is Eldrick.
Yeah.
His name isn't Tiger.
Yep.
But that's his common law name now
Yeah.
because it's been out there so often. So it's interesting. You know, you see it all the time, but you don't know it.
Well, they used to call me the magnet when I played left field until I started dropping balls and I lost that one. So.
Well, then a lot of actors and actresses don't.
Stage
that's
names.
That's not their real name. Yeah, I mean, often it's not even like Nicolas Cage. I don't know what his real name is, but obviously his real name is not Nicolas Cage. It's something. It's actually something completely off the wall.
Mark Twain, Samuel
Mark Twain,
Clemens.
That's correct.
That's right. Nicolas Cage, he's the guy that did Godfather, didn't
Scorsese?
No, not Coppola. He
Francis
said Coppola.
Coppola.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, I was gonna say he did not do The Godfather. No, he was not. But yeah,
All right,
he
so
is
we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to go ahead and talk about sexting and child pornography and how you can avoid the pitfalls of Penal Code Section 311.2. This is Craig Ashton with Tim Hodson and Ed Shady on All Things Legal. Back. If you're just joining us, this is Craig Ashton on Money 105.5, the Wall Street Business Network. The law firm of Ashton & Price is sponsoring this show. I'm joined by Edward Sade. Shady, this is the time you want a shady lawyer on your side.
Exactly. You got Joe Jackson playing right now.
Very nice. And Tim Hodson, Joe Jackson, you have no idea who that is.
Is it Michael Jackson's father?
Yeah, it is. That's
It's
good.
from the Look Sharp album.
I know. I know what it is.
We're bringing in a different generation. Tim Hodson, an accomplished attorney, happens to be, if not in appearance, in terms of chronologically, a little bit younger. It brings a different kind of perspective to the show. You probably were able to write all your papers with the benefit of a computer and Google.
Absolutely. I didn't have to type or handwrite anything.
When I wrote my thesis at Cal, based upon the semiology and the beatification of Unipro Serra, and whether or not you could place that into a philosophical range of semiology. The thesis that I wrote had to be typed on a typewriter with whiteout, and it took me longer to type that thing than it did to write it out longhand and research it.
And did you guys have to write the bar, handwrite the bar?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did handwrite the bar. Oh, you didn't handwrite the bar?
No, I was able to do it on a laptop.
Well,
Yeah.
Wow. Well, the nice thing is when you're handwriting the bar, they can't totally read what you're saying.
And your handwriting is atrocious, so they probably just
They're
like,
going,
ask
huh.
this guy, I don't even want to try to read this chicken scratch.
7 out of the 10 words were actually relatively interesting. I think he knows what he's talking about. All right, so this morning we were talking about, the reason I bring up the technology issue is that, back when I was in high school, no computers, sexting, texting, cell phones. That was on the Jetsons.
Oh yeah. Somebody had a cell phone. It was like, oh my God.
Yeah,
It was about as big as a boombox.
Yeah, meet George
In a
Jetson.
briefcase.
I thought we'd have flying cars before we had this kind of stuff. So anyway, what we have now is an unusual area whereby the law really hasn't caught up, where we have youngsters under 18, so they're considered minors, who are, let's say your son Zach receives, when he was under 18, because he just turned 18, receives a naked picture from his girlfriend and she's underage. And technically speaking, under Penal Code 311.11, that is knowingly sending, so she's going to be in violation of the child pornography laws, and he's receiving it, and so perhaps he's in violation as well.
Thank God that never happened.
and the problem is California
That
doesn't
you know of.
No.
California doesn't have any specific law to deal with this, right? So when you get an unsolicited picture from a minor, and you're also a minor, you run the risk, depending on where you are, of being prosecuted. And this has been happening in the South. We've got some examples in Georgia,
New
we've
York.
got New York, North Carolina, where they've got these issues where two sweethearts are texting back naked pictures of each other. And the idea is, what do? Do you charge them with a felony? Do you charge them with a misdemeanor? Do you say, hey, look, knock it off? Parents, take the phone away. That's what I think should happen.
Yes. The
Because
parents should be involved.
when you're that age, you're just not thinking straight. And the technology is such now that it happens too easily. And when it's unsolicited, you find yourself in California on a wobbler. If a prosecutor technically wanted to follow the letter of the law, you could be charged with a felony. And if you're charged, but they decide not to prosecute, that could be discovered later on. And you're asked when you're applying for a job at Facebook, have you ever been prosecuted for a felony? And you'd have to answer yes.
Well, luckily, a lot of these DAs are thinking outside of the box and are not going full bore against these kids because they understand the situation and they understand the law hasn't caught up. So they're trying to be somewhat creative. Most of them are putting them on probation and internet banned, etc., which is much smarter than ruining these kids' lives and being as a registered sex offender or a felon for just being dumb and being kids. I mean, but as we were talking about a little earlier, and Ed had a good point. There's a big difference between this and somebody being coerced to do it, or an adult getting involved and distributing the picture, or to be done in a revenge setting as well is different too.
One, like in the article, what Mr. Fitzpatrick, the president of the National District Attorneys Association, said, he said, my advice to my colleagues is to lobby the legislature to get a statute appropriate to the conduct involved. If the motivation is immaturity and teenage imbecility, which happens quite often, there ought to be alternatives available in all 50 states.
Well, immaturity and imbecility happens on the show on a weekly basis.
Right, we'd be in trouble if we
Yeah.
prosecuted for that. No, and that's. I'm glad that they're being smart. I mean, I used to be a public defender, so I've had many legal arguments with DAs. But I'm glad that the DAs are thinking outside the box on this and not just being literal and, well, it's the law, we have to prosecute. Like, let's get a little smarter here. I mean, the law of child pornography never dreamed that this type of scenario would happen. It's more of guys in their basements with VHS tapes and not this kind of setting.
Yeah, and I think that there was some, because we have to actually legislate this, and it's about time, because you can't put, especially, I don't have any children, but your son just turned 18, but most parents have their children's phones in their name.
Mhm.
And so you get
Good
sent a
point.
picture on your phone of a naked 16-year-old, and guess what? Edward Shady is now technically in violation of 311.11.
Good point.
Yeah, but it requires some knowing. I mean, if you get something, a picture, and you have to open it, and all of a sudden you go, oh my God, you erase it. You didn't knowingly receive
Well,
it.
yeah, try to prove that.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Shady, you've got 35 pictures of naked 16-year-olds.
You know,
It was my son's phone.
That
Well,
might
that's
be
not what
the
he's saying.
Yeah.
And so, that you put yourself in the crosshairs. I'm sure that
Don't
O.J.
connect
Simpson.
my name with this anymore.
All right. Hypothetically.
Not even hypothetically. You use an anonymous name.
All right. I think the audience knows that. Well, all right. Anyway, so I think the point has been made. I understand your trepidation as to having you even hypothetically connected to this issue, and I can say unequivocally that Ed has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But here's the thing: O.J. Simpson clearly cut off the head of his ex-wife and her boyfriend.
If it was on his phone, we know he did.
And he was acquitted, right? So the point is that the legal system is unpredictable. And if you're a parent out there and you have a phone in your name that you have in the hands of a person under 18, be very careful about what they receive. And you really ought to pay attention. Because if they're receiving pictures like this, who knows what else they're doing. So the idea is you don't want to expose yourself to possible prosecution, having to explain to yourself why this is in your name and all these naked pictures of minors are on there, and you're not involved in child pornography, because you don't want to have to register as a sex offender, and you don't want to have your children exposed to this. So pay attention. But we need to do something in California to make sure that we understand that this is more of a parental issue
Oh,
and not
absolutely.
a legal issue, unless there's adults involved, unless there's bullying involved, unless they
Coercion
put
or
coercion,
anything like that,
illegal
intimidation.
sexual activity, 14-year-old with a bunch of 17-year-olds and all this stuff is going on, then maybe you want to prosecute in that case. If there's abuse, if it's put on a public forum, but if it's a private picture between two immature individuals who are merely now trying to ferret their way through the intricacies of going through puberty, which is a difficult time. You have these hormones raging, and now you have this extra tool, which is a magical phone that you can take a picture and send it across the city to your boyfriend or your girlfriend.
Well, like you said, imbecility and immaturity should be taken into account.
Well, and the bottom line, and parents need to be parents here. Don't report your daughter's boyfriend because you don't like him because your daughter sent him a picture. That's your kid's fault. That's your daughter's fault, not the other kid's fault. Don't ruin his life by taking him to the DA. You got to do something about this kid because he's getting naked pictures from my daughter. I mean, be a parent in the situation. Don't always run to an authority or the DA with your parenting problems. I mean, people just need to be smarter about this. But I mean, if they're blasting it on Facebook as revenge, that's a completely different story.
Yeah,
I mean,
common sense should prevail.
Right, but it never does.
And the problem is